Okay, so Alice and I are going to talk today about our work together on the exhibition Encounters the Immaterial at the Wits Art Gallery. I'm going to hand over to Alison to begin, and then after the first section, then I'll also talk. So Alison, if you'd like to take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for Zooming me in to be part of this presentation with Cameron. I'm going to start off just giving a brief context of the exhibition that we collaborated on, and then we'll hand over to Cameron to talk more specifically about the sound piece and sound components within the exhibition. The exhibition that we are talking about is called Encounters with the Immaterial. And next slide, please. This is a view of the entrance to the museum where the exhibition was mounted. And the exhibition encounters, the theme of the exhibition actually arose out of my interest in the philosopher Arthur Danto's answer to his own question, what separates artworks from other kinds of things? And he spent his career spanning about 40 years exploring the answer to this question. You know, what it separates an artwork from other things, especially after artists start to use things from everyday life in their artworks, which means that it's not only how the artwork looks that might distinguish it from other sorts of things. And in a book published just the year before his death, he offers a tentative answer, as philosophers do, suggesting that for him, what separates artworks from other sorts of things is that artworks are meaning embodied, which is like I think it's a philosophical answer that isn't really an answer in some ways. But I became interested in that idea of a way of distinguishing artworks, because what it really points to for me is the idea that artworks, through their materiality and form, point to the metaphysical and the immaterial, that is not necessarily what we see, but thought, belief, abstraction, emotions, spirituality, and so on. So I started to curate an exhibition with artworks from the Wits Art Museum holdings that explored that connection between the material and immaterial in different ways. And right at the beginning of the process, I approached Cameron, who, with Jonathan and Kathleen Tagg, had previously engaged with an exhibition that I curated where they did fascinating projects with their music students. So I approached Cameron at the beginning of this process to say, well, would you like to collaborate again? Because in the first instance, I wasn't part of the collaboration. They responded to some work that I did. So this time around, I thought it would be interesting to work with Cameron from the beginning of the process. And initially I had thought that we would also work with the students in some way, but as the project unfolded, so we ended up collaborating in interesting ways, which you'll hear about in a moment, around these questions of the connection between the material and the immaterial in the art museum. And then we did rope in students at different points throughout the process. Next slide, please. So the way that I approached the curation, so I'm going to just talk about the whole show briefly, and then Cameron will add more detail about the sound works. What I did as curator was to start to look across the collections and artworks in the museum, which date from the early 1900s till 2022, from across the African continent, to explore the different ways that the artists engage with the material and the immaterial in their work. So this was the first cabinet in the entrance to the exhibition, and here the artworks in the cabinet each represent a kind of theme that you could see throughout the exhibition. And Cameron will show you an immersive video shortly where you get a better sense of the whole. But I deliberately covered one side of the cabinet, the side that faced the museum. As you can see in this image, it's opaque so that it has architecture tracing paper on it, to turn the artworks in the cabinet in a way into shadows from the side of the museum. So it was, I was trying to disrupt the viewing of the works in the first instance, to, on the one hand, to draw attention to the ways of looking that we are accustomed to within the space of the museum, but also to point to highlight the shadows of the artworks, to kind of signpost the engagement with the metaphysical, that which we cannot touch but might perceive with our different senses. Next slide, please. So that concept of the metaphysical, the shadow, the unseen, the trace, one way in which the exhibition was exploring the connection between the material and the immaterial. Another way was through how artists, looking at artists who deliberately engage with discourses of art. And this image is an example of that. It's two little embroideries on canvas, about 40 centimeters square each, done by women of the Case Karma embroidery project that's based in the Eastern Cape. And they reinterpreted Picasso's Three Musicians. And so this is one of my favorite works on the exhibition, in fact, because of the inversion of the canon, where Picasso, who is known for stealing from African art unashamedly, and is now being appropriated in reverse in a way by this project, and turned also into an embroidery, which in discourses of art was historically considered a lower art form. I think that's shifted a lot now, but those kind of engagements with different aspects of discourses of art I found quite interesting. And there are a few works on the show in which this kind of exploration of discourse happens. Next slide, please. Then there's also this work, a work by Clive van den Berg. This is called Figure in Disguise. And I was interested in the work because to me it seemed like an unfinished figure. And it seemed also to me to speak so much about kind of people and how we are always becoming, I think, as we experience different things, as we grow, as we learn. And that unfinishedness of the torso spoke to me a lot about sort of being the sort of humanity and vulnerability. And then I interviewed the artist after the work was on the show, in fact, and he told me that, which I didn't know at the time, he made this work in 2017 when there were a number of killings in Iran of homosexuals. So not Ghana specifically. He was responding to Iran, and he made this piece as a homage to those individuals who were murdered. And so, and then the way that he treats the wood and the wounds of the wood are so poignant. So this work fits into the theme of artists who use the materiality of their medium to convey their message. The shapes also of the wounds, I'm not sure how, I think you might see them better than me. I'm looking at the tiny thumbnail, but the over there on the arms and the torso, the shapes also looked a bit like the conical shape of the speaker, which resonates with other aspects of the exhibition also quite beautifully. So next slide, please. Yeah, so now we're moving into the main exhibition space. These slides each just show a sample of works that speak to one theme, and you'll see how this is like a walk through the exhibition, and soon we'll see the well, that I think will help you see the connections between the works. These two works were on a wall alongside other abstract works exhibited in the space where the sound installation was set up and most prominent. And I thought, in terms of the theme of connecting the material to the immaterial, these works in their abstraction talk about how artists become very interested in their media to say something about making. There's not, they're not referential other than referring to themselves as abstract works, which I thought also spoke nicely to the sound works, because they're also not referential as such. So I thought, and you'll see more, and we'll also hear more in a moment. Next slide, please. Right, then there are lots of instruments in the Wit Art Museum collection. Here's a sample of some of the instruments that were on exhibition. And you can see bells and lira and different kinds of drums. There are 68 instruments on the whole exhibition, and actually 170 artworks in total, of which 68 were instruments. And this is really where our collaboration comes alive, I would say, because I became interested in how the instruments are, for me, this kind of perfect embodiment of this connection between the immaterial and the material. That instruments are material, they have aesthetic properties, but they're also made to be played and held. They have a closeness with the body that is interesting. And the sound is immaterial, right? It's oral. But interestingly, once instruments become part of the museum collection, they are valued because of their connections to communities and because of their aesthetic properties, but we were not allowed to play them anymore and not even touch them or beat them. We were chaperoned as we walked through the museum storerooms to choose instruments to put on the exhibition, and watched very carefully that we didn't do like even a little tap, So there's a paradox in a way, that the instruments are being preserved, but actually not being played. So they're not themselves, or they're not true, I think, not truly themselves. Cameron spoke a lot about how they are unhappy in that state of silence. But also I think, as I've come to learn, vulnerable to disintegration because they're not being played, and not being oiled, and whatever happens is part of their life as instruments. So the challenge became, how do we play the instruments without touching them, so that we can speak to and explore these works as instruments that make sound, and restore or maybe connect to their lives outside of the museum, even though they're inside the museum now. And that became a challenge that ended up quite dominant. I wouldn't say, I don't know if dominating is the right word, but became very prominent in the exhibition because I think Cameron found really interesting ways to make sounds with the instruments. Oh, you can change, new slide, please. Sorry. But also what happened here, some Tsonga drums that were part of the, on the show. New slide, please. Here is a sculpture that is, so it's not an instrument to be played, but it's a sculpture by an artist named Henry Mashololo to look like a violin. So there's another interesting connection where the artists are making representations of instruments, and they were also on the show some artists that had made sculptures of dancers or musicians. So the artists themselves are interested in music and the oral through the visual, which was an interesting find as we were looking through the collection. Next slide, please. So here is an installation view of the core gallery where these drums and other instruments were arranged in very deliberate ways for the sound installation, but also for the to speak to the other works on the wall. So I'm not going to say too much about this, other than for me as a visual artist and curator, what became fascinating was how the oral dominated and changed the space. And that might be a kind of banal comment to make to a group of musicians, but for the in terms of the white cube, which is generally silent other than if there's video art or some specific performance, this is not quite the usual way of exhibiting works. And also it shifted and changed the feeling of the space so significantly, and I think was really interesting because it also embodied the idea of that connection between the material and the immaterial, because the immaterial became the kind of most prominent aspect of the exhibition. Next slide, please.
I think we need to move on to my section now because we've already gone to 20 minutes and the presentation's meant to be 20 minutes.
Oh, have we?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm
yes,
just going to
go
quickly
on.
zip through. So everything...
Oh, I apologize.
Don't worry. Everything that Alison has said was in the service of where I came in, that we have these instruments that can't be played, can't be touched. We had to move them with gloves and everything. And how can we get them to, how can we energize them to get them to make sound again? How can we use them as activators in the space and come closer to their role as they were outside of the museum and not their role as basically originally ethnographic artifacts that have been absorbed into the art museum. The Wits Art Museum does not have the remit of collecting instruments, but it has an awful lot of them because it's absorbed other collections from the university, one of which is a large ethnographic collection. So that these instruments started off as ethnographic artifacts and have been brought in to the artistic realm, the realm of the art museum. And so they have a little bit of an identity crisis in that sense, which means that they've never been out. All of the instruments that are on the floor of the art gallery there have never been exhibited at the Wits Art Museum in its current form, in the building it's currently in, up until this exhibition, because curators didn't know really what to do with them. So Alison was incredibly brave and had a tremendous vision to bring this many, not just the instruments, but a large proportion of the artworks on display either very rarely have made it out of the museum's vaults or have never, as I say, done so. So my way of dealing with the challenge was to create a multi-channel sound system that played through the instruments. And I have to say that Izan's presentation at the Indigenous Music Technologies conference that William and others organised was part of the inspiration for this. Although I wasn't doing anything that scientific, the idea as convolution, the idea of almost sort of acoustically convolving by using the body of the instrument to act as a filter for the sound that's coming from a loudspeaker that is actually normally below the instrument, in this case, and playing up through it, was my starting point. So if I just go through to find my first sketch here, of how we might lay out the instruments. You can see that they're all, as you saw on that original photo, on the floor of the gallery. We had over 400 meters of speaker cable connecting them together. And the Tonga drums that Alison just mentioned before, I so rudely cut her off, formed the core of the drums that we used, because they're pedestal drums. They have a hollow pedestal, and they would normally be played between the legs, but we've got them on these floating plinths under which were hidden speakers that are pointed upwards and would play the sound through the drum, and so it's the skin ends up vibrating a little bit. We get the resonance from the body of the drum. We get a specific sonic imprint from the drums each time. And later when there isn't much later, but very later, a little bit later, when I play you some sound clips, you'll see hopefully that in some of the more abstract sounds that I chose to diffuse through these channels, they're designed to have quite a lot of frequencies in quite a wide range, so that you could specifically hear the filtering of the different resonators. And it was striking. I didn't think that, as we heard in the previous presentation, it's not until you put something like this up that you know how it's going to work and how it's going to sound. And I didn't know if we would hear any difference really between the drums, but I was struck by how different the same sound, sometimes through the same speaker, but I had to use a range of speakers, how different, but I had 4 that were identical, and putting them through 4 different drums, a completely different sonic imprint, which was marvelous. So just going back to, you saw my original sketch, that distilled down into this, which is now on its side for the Art Museum floor plan. There were 14 channels. You saw that wall of speakers, which was quite a fun thing to be able to diffuse things that weren't specifically linked to any one instrument from, and that had 3 channels plus one behind some of the wind instruments. But the others were on the floor, hidden either very close to or playing actually through, as I said, the drums on the floor. And it meant that you could hear, as the audience, if we're going to call it that, the visitors to the exhibition, the sound moved around them, because I used individual sound points that moved more than having all of the speakers playing at once. I didn't do that for similar reasons to what we heard before. The sound was moving between the different drums, often rhythmically, but sometimes as a kind of swell of sound. And so it would move between the people. As the people, we designed the floor plan so that there was a flow, so people could move around the sound as well as the sound moving around them. This was linked to the idea I didn't want to try and create a kind of field recording sense of what these drums might have done in the real world, as it were, partly because these drums would never have existed together. They come from a wide geographic area and different time periods. A lot of them are over 100, well, around 100 years old, many of them around 90 years old, some of them a lot newer. The Tonga drums obviously come from Zambia and Zimbabwe. We have a wonderful hourglass drum, which I'll show you in a minute, from Namibia, which produced a beautiful resonance as you entered the exhibition, and some from Congo as well. So they're drums that we've brought together artificially, if you like, that wouldn't have normally played together. So I tried to create music that would energize them and work for them rather than any aspect of recreation, which is quite interesting in terms of what William was saying yesterday, and you know, we can talk about that maybe in the break about that approach. This idea of movement was also important in the exhibition as a whole. Alison chose certain artworks that suggested movement and dance and gesture that weren't actually moving themselves because they were static, but had that suggestion to do with the form and the shape of the work themselves. There was there was a dancer, a ballet dancer that's been carved by an African artist, but there's also a wonderful metal sculpture by a sculptor called Vincent Balloy that has an amazing shape to it. It just feels like it's in the middle of flight almost, pointing into these drums. So very quickly, one of the challenges for us now has been to document this exhibition, how we can make it live digitally and in the realm of pixels. It was really interesting to see in the previous presentation that the multi-channel work started as a thing they were given, a visualization they were given, and then they had to make it real. We've gone the other way. It was real. Now it has to become digital. I'm just going to play you this quickly from partway through, about 1 minute 16. Should be about there. Yeah, we'll just go up the... So this is a video of a kind of Google Maps style tour. So this is the beginning of the main gallery that you saw before. That's the Namibian drum that has the wonderful resonance you see as you come in. You saw those photographs as individual, those pictures as individual images earlier. This drum here on the side, it's by Samson Madzunga. It's another one that was carved as an artwork rather than as a drum. We'll see it again in a minute. There were two there. And interestingly, he had a door in the drum. He used to put things inside the drum as a sort of, not spirits, but activators for the drum. He did make some drums that were big enough he could get inside and actually hit from below, which was wonderful considering that's what we were doing with the speakers. We had two slit drums that we used in the exhibition from Congo. You can see one there, and then there's another one on that pedestal there. We had to fake those a bit. We couldn't get speakers small enough to go inside the drums, so they're just playing at the mouth of the drum. That's the Balloy sculpture, the Vincent Balloy sculpture in the corner there that I mentioned. You can see the Samson Madzunga drums there in the center. So hopefully this gives you a kind of sense of the geography of how the exhibition looked. I should be talking into that one. Now, moving on to the approach to the sound, this is just a few snippets of how the different approaches to the sound that I works. The first one is probably the most abstract. It's got quite a lot of range of frequencies in it and would swell between the different speakers as we went, and was activated interactively. You'll hear a bang at the beginning, which was came from the middle drum each time. I'll explain how that worked in a second. So here's just a short snippet of this. And then it will swell again. It's going to come out. That will come out of a different drum. It was an awful lot louder in the actual exhibition space, and the resonance of the room itself obviously made it louder as well. And there were two bits of interactivity in the sound of the exhibition. One was a sensor near the middle drum, so if anybody went up to have a look at the drum would go bang like that, and then that sequence would go around all of the different drums. The other one was a delay line linked to a microphone. So you might, if we go back to this side, you'll see that there's a mic input in the corner, which was near the Balloy sculpture I mentioned. I set that up so that when you had to wake the microphone up so it didn't capture just anything, but then it jumped to live delay line, and it would choose one of 5 different delay settings with a different rhythm. And whatever you did into that microphone would then get dispersed amongst the different drums with a different rhythm depending on which it had chosen, which delay pattern it had chosen. And that proved to be probably the most, from a public point of view, the most successful part of the sound of the exhibition. People loved to do that and spend time making all sorts of sounds into it and hearing them diffused around the drums. And then, just to give you an example of another very different type of sound that I had diffused. Oh no, it's the same one, sorry. Here we go, the clicks. So each of these little gestures were from different drums. then a little bit of what I call the grain texture I used. And then lastly, the most mimetic. So there were a few where I tried to hear the drums as drums because it didn't feel right not to. And I found some virtual instruments of the sit drums, for example, and created MIDI composites of drums that will maybe sound a little bit like the Tonga pedestal drums, although I couldn't find specific. I could hear in field recordings their overall sound, but I couldn't find specific samples of the drums individually on their own. And this one I used at the beginning of every day because I had to turn this on manually every day. It used every single speaker, so I would hear it every morning at 8 o'clock as I was setting it up. It's just as mimetic as you can get, really. Go. And it was longer than that, but that's just a short section. So that gives you a very kind of fast, speedy tour around our work at the Wits Art Museum and the Encounters of the Immaterial exhibition. We will have this up fully as a site for you to explore in the next month or so, and we hope you can come and have a look with us. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Alison.
Can we have Alison back?
Alison, can you turn your camera back on?
Yes, hello. And I'm so sorry that I took too much of the intro.
Don't worry. No, we got through it all.
No. It's absolutely no problem. This mic is live, right? Yeah. Good. It's absolutely no problem, Alison. This to both of you, hearty congratulations. This is fantastic work, and so stimulating for a composer. And it's so interesting to see a visual artist, somebody from the visual domain, collaborating with a composer and working with physical objects. I mean, that just triggers limitless potential, and I find it, very, very important work. Alison, if you don't mind, I'd like to open up the floor for questions, if it's okay with you guys. William, I need a question, please, William. It's your... Yes, indeed. Alison, we have as guest William Fourie from Rhodes University.
Alison, lovely to see you. Thanks, Cameron, for this really good work. And of course, as somebody who took some time to speak about materiality last night, I'm of course absolutely obsessed. I have a question actually around the museum custodians or preservers, or whatever horrible term we want to give to them. So when you diffuse the sound into, or convolve, I guess, the sound into the drums, they didn't think that was touching.
They didn't think it was...
question, sorry.
Meaning that we were moving, the membrane, and that might be...
I mean, it's not like they, at that point, said, no, stop playing the drum.
No, they, right from the beginning, they knew what we were going to do. And we worked with an amazing team of technicians to make the plinths and the cradles to hold all of these speakers. Yeah. Which, by the way, I didn't say, it was hilarious listening to the previous presentation where they had all of that money. All of these, we had 4 studio speakers. Everything else we had to buy ourselves, because you can't hire, and in our situation, you can't hire for 3 months, which was the length of this exhibition, sound equipment. So it was all done DIY with what amplifiers we could get hold of, beg, borrow, steal. We borrowed a Macintosh and ran a trial version of Ableton on the Mac. So I had to put everything on here first. It was an old Mac, so it wouldn't run Ableton 11. I had to put everything on here first and then transport it over because you couldn't save on it. So it was done on a budget. But I feel for the money, the effect for the money. They got a lot of bang for their buck. Yeah. They have an amazingly open-minded... They were obviously very concerned that we must be careful with the drums and not damage them. But, the level of vibration isn't great that we use. I turned it off every night because I was worried about fire hazard, and I talked to them about... We were thinking of putting some of the speakers and maybe activators inside. We decided not to do it for that reason. We didn't want to warm the instruments up. We didn't want to have any chance of fire in that building. Obviously, that would have been completely tragic. So I went in every night to turn it off and went in every morning to turn it on. But Julia Charlton and her team at the Art Museum, amazingly open-minded and a joy to work with, I think it's fair to say. Alison, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I wanted to say, could you show people the wall with the car speakers?
Well, yeah. Well, we had 4 studio sort of semi-professional monitors, KRK monitors, in the biggest drums, or underneath the biggest drums. The rest were all car speakers of various types, of various shapes and sizes, and some of which we managed to get from car audio places, but many of them I ended up buying because they throw them away too quickly.
Yeah.
But
I've actually got a little bit of a follow-up,
Yeah.
which is a slightly harder question, and it's around the sense of touching. So, of course, post-World War II, like I said last night, the CIA and British intelligence services developed what they called no-touch torture.
Right.
And the premise was that music or sound vibrations don't count as a form of touching. And so when you want to torture somebody, stick earphones, well, headphones, I mean, that's why they were originally developed, headphones on the subject's head, and then blast a whole lot of really horrible sounds into their ears. And it's not torture because you're not touching them, right? And so I wonder how the institutionalization or the museumification of these instruments, which should be played, and I've got a big issue with that, how it perhaps mimics a type of institutional thinking that short circuits at the moment where sound enters, right? If we don't really understand sound, so it doesn't count as touching when you insert the speaker underneath. Not to call Wits Art Museum site for intelligence service torture, but I'm wondering whether that institutional thinking around sound short circuits in this space in a little while.
I think it does. I hear what you're saying, but I think to just accept that would be to underestimate and undervalue the Wits Art Museum team. We spoke to them at length about what we were doing all the way through, and they were aware of the implications of using sound, and that the skin of the instruments would end up moving as a result. And I think it's probably fair to say they weren't particularly aware or sensitized to that at the beginning of the process. But not only did we make sure they were involved in that, they wanted to be involved in that. They are exceptionally inquisitive in areas that are not, and I think this is just specific to that team. They're a small team. There's about 4 of them. They work very well and closely together, and are very inclusive in the way they work. And they just made sure that they understood every step of the way, and therefore did understand what we were doing. So yeah.
And then just, oh, sorry, Alison.
No, I just wanted to add that I think the part of the way they think about touch is also around oils on the hand. So like with the rules of all the works in the museum, whether they're instruments or not, the hands mustn't ever touch the work. So they might have just translated that, not thinking philosophically about, is sound a form of touch, or is any kind of movement of a surface a form of touch? Maybe a kind of very mercenary approach to oils on the hand can leave residue on an object.
Which can add to its degrading speed of...
Yeah, so nothing, so that we wouldn't touch the surface of a painting either.
Yeah.
We did see people touch. I mean, we were constantly in the room there having to tell people not to do it, because the way we'd set it up, they were so inviting. They wanted to be played. Yeah. And I mean, it was difficult for us now. There was one which one of the sit drums had an example of the beta right next to it, and you so wanted to take that with you. But,
good way. I'll just have one little final point, and is I hope that this engagement with sound perhaps opens up a dialogue within the museum for the possibility of thinking about more sophisticated notions of touch in that space, because you can, of course, just put a glove on and play the mbira, and then you don't have the problem of oil. You know, if they really want to go that way, but the oil is absolutely brilliant for the metals, so please use oily fingers when you're playing the mbira. But I hope that maybe a takeaway is that let's think a little bit in more complicated ways around sound and touch and all that type of stuff. That's me, sorry for hogging the space.
I think they are up for that. They certainly very much felt that it was a beginning of a process. They haven't had sound in the museum before, and they're quite excited to do more. So, yeah, absolutely.
You know, these rules around touching or not touching instruments, that to me, that's a cultural universal. You know, you may not handle a rare Stradivarius for the very same reasons. So I don't think this is at all limited to the work that you've been engaged in. On a lighter note, I believe the torture instrument of choice in Guantanamo Bay was recordings of the Günther Kallmann choir bells. Apparently that did the trick. So I read somewhere. So it's way in another frequency range compared to, well, we saw one bell instrument, but to the drumming drum instruments that we saw.
Yes. Well.
Alison, to you and to your fantastic work, I wish really all the best. And Cameron, thank you for bringing it to Cape Town.
Thank you.
In such a visceral sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.